Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes. Hey, lovers of small business and good stories in general. Welcome to episode 84 of Small Business War Stories. And today I stopped in Bozeman, Montana, and I had the opportunity to sit down with Bryan Deats of Fightforce MMA Promotions. And we have never had anybody like this on the show, somebody who promotes mixed martial arts, fights for a living. I thought it was a really unique type of business. This is somebody who's 100% doing this because they really care about it for the passion. They also have an academy, a jiu-jitsu academy there in Montana. And it's a business that I'd really never had any exposure to or understood. So I wanted to sit down with Bryan and hear all the stories about what it takes to be a mixed martial arts fighter and to run a promotion. This episode is a part of the Soul of America tour. And as such, it is brought to you by FreshBooks. FreshBooks is a small business accounting and finance software that helps you run all the things on the back end that you need to run well with your finances in order to be successful. But you don't really want to. I don't want to run all the finance, all the invoicing, all the taxes, all the stuff that you have to do on the back end. So if you're a small business, go to FreshBooks, freshbooks.com, and freshbooks.com/war stories. And put in Small Business War Stories as a place where you heard about them. In this episode, like every episode of Small Business War Stories, is brought to you by Proven. Proven is a company I started. It's proven.com. It is a small business hiring tool. So if you need to organize all of your hiring in one place and you don't have a lot of money to spend on expensive, fancy software, we have all the fancy software. We have the expensive part. So go check it out. Go to proven.com, and we also have a great blog with resources for your small business at blog.proven.com. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode 84 with Bryan Deats of Fightforce Promotions in Bozeman, Montana. And we are live here, and I have the pleasure here to be in Bozeman, Montana, and I'm sitting here with Bryan Deats this morning. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And Bryan runs a really, really cool and interesting business called Fightforce.
Correct. We run a amateur and semi-pro and professional mixed martial arts promotion here in Montana.
That's amazing. And you're focused on, it's a regional promotion, right? So it's focused on the Rocky Mountain kind of area?
Yeah, so we're focused in Montana as far as our events, and
Okay.
we bring fighters in from Canada, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, South Dakota, North Dakota. We brought fighters in farther from that if needed for the show.
Okay, cool. So what inspired you to start this? I mean, there obviously, I think many people, probably not everybody, but many people are familiar with things like the UFC, and there also used to be Strikeforce and now Bellator, and they're kind of like major, worldwide promotions. What inspired you to start a local one?
I started training in martial arts when I was very young, and when I was in college, I started training in mixed martial arts. And I started helping coach fighters between 1996 and 1998, and we would travel to other states and we traveled to Canada and other places to do fight shows and go, get our guys some competition. Through that, I kind of saw what the promoters were doing correctly, what they were doing wrong, and there was a point where a gentleman in Butte named Bill Fisher wanted to hold an MMA event at the Civic Center there. Mm-hmm. So I told him I would help him out with the event, and we created the Fightforce event together at that time, and that got us going with our first show. Cool. And the goal was just kind of try to have a show that's run correctly, for safety for the fighters and everything else, and that's kind of how we got started on the events. And then after that, we just kind of kept having events, and eventually I bought the company for myself, and keep going with them since then.
Cool. And there's probably a lot that goes into this. So MMA has evolved a lot over the last 20 years. It's probably from the original introduction of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I'm going to try not to nerd out on Jiu-Jitsu too much. I've been training for about 6 or 7 years now, so I love this stuff. But the introduction of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu with the original UFC But then there was the perception in the public that it was, John McCain came out calling it human cockfighting, and then people, it had a very negative perception that's changed over time to now it's more respected as the martial arts disciplines that it entails, and also in many ways a lot of people like it more than things like boxing. How have you seen that evolution happen, and what are the things that doing this the right way, which is one of the things you mentioned, entails?
So we have seen, at the beginning, a lot of people were coming to the fights. I've really seen a difference in spectators and how they view the fights and how they act in the audience and in the crowd. Even from personally going to shows in the past, UFCs when they were going on early on. The first one I went to was UFC 6, and I can't remember when that was, but that was pretty early on.
Sure.
And, just the atmosphere of the crowd and the type of people that were going. And that's definitely changed as audiences have been educated, because over the 20 years that the sport's been going on TV, people understand it now. People are watching it, and they understand what techniques are legal, what techniques aren't legal, and the stuff they didn't understand before, like submission game. Like back in the day, people would laugh if it went to the ground, or somebody was going for a chokehold, or something was going on the ground. It would just be laughter because nobody understood it, and that was their reaction. Like, what am I? Do I need to laugh at this? I guess I'll laugh at this. I don't know why is he doing that? But now, if somebody gets caught in a chokehold or submission, especially if like they were in trouble, you hear the cheers from the crowd, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like this guy might get out." They understand it a little bit that something's happening. So that's been a big change as far as what I've seen with the audiences, and I'm sure. Sponsorships has been easier because of that as well. At the beginning, it was harder to get sponsors because people are going to be like, "Oh, what is this event? I don't know what this is. That doesn't, click with me ethically. I think this is just two people fighting." And that's changed as well because sponsors are coming on or looking at it as sportsmen. The athletes as well are more sportsmen now.
It takes a lot of dedication to do this. To be a fighter is. Not only do you have to have the discipline to do this and to get in day in, day out and take the bodily punishment, but learning all the disciplines. I mean, jiu-jitsu in itself is a lifelong, pursuit, and then all the different striking arts and everything, and putting it all together is like another. So it's really hard to do this.
Yeah, absolutely, and I believe that's one of the things that has changed too. In the beginning, there's been a lot of athletes that were like, "Oh, I'm a tough guy, I can do this," and they're not even training. So we were, up until this last year, we were doing anywhere from 8 to 10 events a year, and it's actually been interesting that we have a lot fewer athletes this year. So we've only done 4 shows this year, and mostly because there's not as many athletes in the state because a lot of the schools are changing their focus, and I think a lot of the tough guys, quote unquote, realize they have to train now, and so when they go to a school and they actually have to learn something, that's where they kind of get, their feel on whether or not they're going to be able to make it and whether or not they're going to be able to do it. So
there used to be people who just literally didn't train and showed up just because they thought that they had won a barroom fight one time.
Yep. I mean, even in the early UFC that happened. There was guys that didn't train, didn't know jiu-jitsu, they just come in and be like, "Oh, I know a little bit. I'm going to get in there and fight." And like some guys that are like, "Oh, I've boxed and I've done, this one martial art for 8 years, but not really training MMA." And that's one of the big changes you see now. If you go back and watch the early fights when they had like ninjutsu guys, like pure ninjutsu guys fighting pure, wrestlers and like different things from their complete styles. And now everybody's training MMA for MMA. You don't see a lot of purists anymore as far as like, I'm only going to train, kung fu and then come into an MMA fight. That doesn't happen now.
Yeah. And actually some of the people who are more purist are basically not finding success. Early on, people didn't know what jiu-jitsu was. But even like Kron Gracie, like he's developing striking, right? Because he uses a lot of jiu-jitsu. But I just use an example of somebody who's like an MMA fighter who Michael would consider a jiu-jitsu purist. Damian Maia is another example, who's somebody who came in from a heavy jiu-jitsu background and had to develop his striking. So you can't just be a one-dimensional fighter anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the big changes I've seen with the athletes, over the time and as it gets exposed and more people see it. And I think it's brought more people into training, and then the training gets better because there's, more money in it for good coaches, and good instructors become part of it. And so the athletes are getting better and better, and you see that, every time you watch a new high level event.
And what are some of the positive impacts that these kind of things have in the community? So I know I've seen firsthand the positive impact that jiu-jitsu's had on me, but how have you seen people develop through maybe they had a rough time in life before and like developed through martial arts, and how do you see fostering this kind of activity as a good thing?
So on two different sides, as far as the event promotions in a town, as long as you're working on having good, positive athletes as kind of like your main event fighters that are good, favorable people in the community, that's very positive for them and for their students to see them compete and get out. It gives them a place to, speak about things they might want to. Within the events, other positive effects for the community is like when we go somewhere, we bring a lot of money into that town as far as like people come into town for, hotel and travel and meals, and we spend money at local advertisers, the local venues. So we do bring a little bit of a burst to the economy each time we go into a town. Locally as a martial arts instructor, the benefits of training the martial arts for somebody that might be having a hard time are always great because we want to put them around good people. Mm-hmm. A lot of times somebody that's having a hard time in their life might not be around the best people in their life, and they don't know how to get away from those people, and they don't have good leaders. So getting here and getting with good positive friends and seeing role models and seeing, hey, this is how this guy lives his life, this is what he does, and talking to him, and that's why he's happy and that's why he doesn't have these problems. And then spending a lot of time trying to help those people out as much as possible to change their lives. We've been working on that actually really hard this week with our kids program, is just keeping everything positive, like always having a positive outlook. There's a lot of negativity in the world, and I just want especially with these young kids, working on them, keeping positive. And like their goal this week is every time you meet somebody is to say something positive or compliment them on something. Every time you talk to somebody, any interaction. Yeah. And that's a good model for the adults as well. And yeah. It's a good thing.
And our mutual friend Justin is one of the instructors here at your academy, and he's kind of like a fighting Buddha.
Yes.
So he's got a lot of interesting philosophy stuff too.
Yeah. He goes into a lot of stuff and meditation, and he's a genius for people that don't know that, but he does a lot of different things. He's an amazing guy to have here, and is an awesome coach at the gym.
Great. Let's talk about the fight game a little bit more. What do you think is going to take for MMA to go truly mainstream and for it to be a even bigger thing and replace maybe even boxing as a main fight game?
Well, I think it's there. I think it has replaced boxing. I think there's a few boxing figures out there that still draw big pay-per-view numbers, but obviously the biggest pay-per-view event ever just happened, and it's because there was like the biggest pay-per-view draw of boxing and MMA together in one event. So obviously they have the biggest numbers ever. If a single promotion just sold for $4 billion, it's mainstream. I mean, that's a ton of money, and it's out there. It's on TV every weekend. Whether it's with UFC or Bellator or Access TV and the different fights that they've been running. So it's pretty mainstream now. Most people have seen it. I don't think it's ever going to be as mainstream as like football or basketball or anything like that, where you have teams and leagues, because when we talk about groups of people kind of creating, I guess, like a little tribe that we like the, Carolina Panthers or whatever the team may be. I think there's a little bit more community there than like having a group that all likes one fighter, because the fighters don't last as long. That team's going to be there for 100 years, but fighters, their longevity is not very long, and it's unforgiving. Like if you lose a fight, your ratings drop, your fans drop. If you lose a basketball game but you still get 20 rebounds, you still did good.
And it's not,
and you can play tomorrow.
It's not like tennis, right? Tennis you can play 5 times a week.
Exactly.
You fight at most 2-3 times a year.
Yeah, the top level guys. With our amateurs, I like my amateurs to get in 4 times a year.
Okay.
And then my upcoming pros also, just because then every 3 months they have a goal that they're working towards, and they're also not fighting every month where all they're doing is training to fight and they're not learning. Yeah. So that's what our goal is, and then we usually miss that goal because somebody might get injured. Life happens, so then you end up getting that 3 times a year, but try to keep them going on that. And we try to fit in grappling tournaments too with our athletes as we can, so that they're just staying competitive and working against different people.
Cool. And grappling, just for our audience's benefit, that would be a tournament where striking is not allowed, but everything else is allowed.
Correct. So it could be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you're grappling or wrestling in the gi with submissions and chokes being legal, or without the gi, which they consider no gi, where you would have maybe like rash guard and shorts on, and grappling in that, and the same kind of wrestling with chokes and joint locks and submission holds.
Interesting. Okay, so you said you did about 4 events this year?
Yeah, we've done 4 events this year.
And do you have any more events coming up this year?
Not this year. We have a few planned for next year, but one of the big things with local and smaller MMA events is you have to have those local athletes to bring the people in. We've tried it a bunch of different ways. We're going to try to bring these headliners, these big fighters from these other states, but nobody knows them and we don't have the money to bring in UFC fighters that somebody would actually know.
Sure.
Because our shows just aren't that big. Our budgets, we try to keep our show budget anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000 at max.
Okay.
And that would be just paying one high-level UFC fighter to come in,
right.
just to show up. So we're really focused on having local athletes because that's what brings the crowd in. And if there's not enough local fighters, we just can't do it.
Okay.
Venues are also a huge issue. There's not a lot of venues in Montana. Every town has about one, and some of those can be difficult to work with depending upon the situation. Some of them are very great to work with, but some of them will be like, the building costs this much, we take 100% of the concessions, and they don't have any wiggle room, where some places will be like, you can bring in your own concessions and do that. We'll help you get hotel rooms. We'll give you a discounted rate because it's a bad weekend and things like that. So
yeah.
That changes also, but it's mostly been just a lack of fighters, and it's that way in Canada also. One of my good friends, Brad Wall, is up there, and there's not as many shows up there as well.
So what's your goal for next year? What do you want to do next year?
I'm going to try to. I'd like to have 6 events.
Okay.
We were doing 10. I do feel I can do a better promotion as far as like getting more sponsors and selling more tickets if I have more time and I'm not doing a show every month.
Okay.
So I'd like to do one like every 2 months so I have more time to work on.
That makes
show.
a lot of sense. So walk me through the process of doing that, of getting sponsors, of drumming up interest for a fight. So you're talking. I think it's really powerful that what you say about getting homegrown fighters, because they'll bring their friends, they'll bring their family, and they'll sell tickets and they do things like that. But what's that process of when you find a venue, negotiating that, and then getting the sponsors and drumming up interest?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like everybody else, I wake up in the morning, I cry first before I go to work. So I usually get up. One of the things I'm constantly working when I'm doing a fight show, and so my first thing is I'll talk to the local coaches, and this is kind of how I'm doing it now versus when we started setting it up. But I'll talk to the local coaches and athletes, and I'm going to go to a town. So like hopefully our next one's going to be in Great Falls in January. Do you guys have enough athletes? Who are your fighters that want to compete? I'll speak with the coaches. I'll get the list of all the local fighters, and I'll be like, okay, so I'd like to have at least 8 local guys that want to fight, varying levels from amateur to pro, and then I'll start negotiating with the venues. So in Great Falls, we negotiate with one of the hotels there, and they give us a really good rate on their ballroom space. It's a very large ballroom space, and then we get hotel rooms, and we get the venue set up. And I'll usually do that once I know I have the athletes, and I'll get a date locked in. Mm-hmm. And then I try to find dates that, there's nothing else going on. Like between now and December, like hunting season's tough in Montana. Football season's tough everywhere because whether it's high school or college football games, it's hard to compete with that. You got to watch for like local concerts that might be popular, somebody bringing a comedian into town. All that sort of stuff. So I kind of make sure that there's nothing else going on in town that's going to conflict too much with it. It's impossible. There's always going to be something else going on,
sure.
But you want to really keep an eye on what is happening.
But that's interesting. That's something else people don't usually think of. Usually, like you maybe think like, oh, is there another maybe sporting event? But you consider any kind of alternative, pastime or
anything can hurt your ticket sales. When we're doing shows where like, you can make anywhere potentially from $1,500 to $10,000 on a show maybe, or some shows don't make anything. And, a difference between 100 people is a lot. At $30 a ticket, that's a $3,000 swing on a small event where you're like, that makes a big difference in being able to do another show and make it worthwhile.
But you're not doing this for the money.
No.
You're doing this because you love it. I mean, this is your life. We're sitting here. There's a slight echo because we're sitting in a beautiful academy that you have here as the snow falls outside. This is the first snow of the season?
No, this is probably the third.
Wow.
Yeah, we got snow early this year.
Okay, got it. But you do this because this is your life and you love it and this is your passion. This is not does not strike me as a get rich quick scheme.
It is not. And that's why I do it. But at the same time, there's family members that are like, hey, if you're spending this much time doing something and there's no return, I have to kind of evaluate that. But some shows there are, some there aren't, and that's why we're looking at doing less shows and. But that's one of the reasons we always look and see what other events are going on, to make sure there's no conflicts there. So
how many fights are in one card usually?
I book 14 usually, and then we usually end up with 10.
Okay.
We lose a lot of fights in the process. Like fighters get hurt, fighters back out, fighters don't show up.
Yeah, I read on your website that you have a very stern warning to fighters, like if you're going to sign up, mean to do it, don't.
Yeah, and then that's really out of respect for the other opponent. Like I understand if you don't want to fight, that's fine. It's not for everybody. But if you're going to say you want to fight and you're going to have an opponent that's going to spend 6 weeks preparing in the gym. They're spending time away from their family. They're getting beat up by their training partners.
Cutting weight.
They're cutting weight. They're dieting. And you're at home because you just wanted to, tell your buddies that you're going to compete on this event, and then you decide to pull out like 3 days before. Happens all the time. Happens to somebody every show. It's just disrespectful to the other opponents, and it's less likely to happen with fighters that come from more reputable gyms. And then people get hurt. Our last fight camp, it was a local show, so we started with 12 guys and we ended up with 9 because 3 of them got injured in training. So that does happen as well, and it's like they just couldn't continue competing because it is hard to get ready for and be safe to get ready for. So going back to where we were at after I get the fight card, I negotiate with the venue, then we start working on sponsors. So I have a sponsor package that I set up. I contact sponsors that we've had that have sponsored us in the past, and we also try to contact pretty much every business we can in town. We'll shoot them emails or phone calls with our sponsor package. We'll give that sponsor information to the fighters as well, so they can go out and sell sponsorships, and then they get a commission on any sponsorships they sell. Around that same time, we'll print out tickets. Fighters can sell tickets. They can make some money off tickets as well. Even if they're amateurs, we give them a commission on tickets too, so that they can, get some fans and get some people in, and they can learn that process. Because even when you're a pro, you need to know how to get sponsors. You need to know, how to sell tickets and make money. Like, that's part of how you're going to make money as a, beginning pro fighter. One of our pros who's 4-0, he's got another fight coming up in Idaho, and we weren't sure if we're going to be able to go because, the fight pays $600 to show and $600 to win, but the medicals and travel and all our additional costs are going to be around $1,000 just to get there. And those aren't covered in the show money. And even if he would win, he'd only win $200, right? And we expect him to win, but we have to raise that sponsor money to cover those costs, so he's not, doing this for free. And that's one of the biggest things with professional MMA for those fighters is there's not a lot of money at the beginning. These smaller amateur shows and pro shows, they don't have a lot of money. So, even the top level guys might get like $1,000 to show and $1,000 to win, up to $2,000 to show and $2,000 to win. Now, if you are winning and you're only fighting 3 times a year, that's only $12,000 that you're making on fighting. And that some of that goes to your gym, your supplement costs, whatever other stuff you have to do just to be able to compete, your equipment. So it's not a lot of money. And even what's the UFC doing now? Like $4,000 and $4,000 is like the first is pay for first time UFC
is that
fighters.
Right?
It's like 4 and 4 or 6 and 6.
So 4 to show, 4 to win.
Yeah. So even that, if you fight twice and you win, that's $16,000 a year. That's poverty.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah. What city can you live in?
You can't. So you have to learn as a fighter, not just the techniques and the competition and the fitness and the nutrition. You have to learn all of that, but you also have to learn how to manage yourself as a business. You're going to be your own business as a fighter, and you have to be able to manage yourself that way. And I think a lot of promotions don't try to teach those guys that. I do as much as I can, like help those guys. Like, here's what you need to do. This is how you can make some money. Go sell these sponsorship. Go sell these tickets. And I try to do that with my fighters before their fights. I'll teach them how to put together a sponsorship package for themselves. This is who you need to go talk to. I'll give them some ideas of people to go talk to so that especially the athletes from my gym learn, how to go get sponsors, how to meet people, how to talk to people, how to introduce themselves, because not a lot of people know how to do that. And they're like, well, I just want to fight. I just want to do this. I'm like, yeah, the only people that just get to fight and train are the guys that have made it and they have managers that do everything else for them. Yeah. Then you get to do that. But at the beginning, you got to do everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. So later on this tour, I'm interviewing Jackson Wink
excellent.
in New Mexico.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm going to get their perspective on their side of the fight game. But I think they have some major names there, right? But all those folks came through this. Came to this level first. Like nobody was born being a headliner UFC fighter.
And we had a fighter last year from their gym fight in Billings, Montana, because he had just moved to their gym. He wasn't a local there, so and he's a pro fighter, but since he wasn't a local, he couldn't get a fight. He's trying to get fights, but they're like, hey man, we want locals.
Yeah.
So that's an example of where somebody needs to go out and be like, hey man, I can sell tickets to this business. If he goes out and hustles first and goes to that promotion locally and says, listen, put me on your card, give me tickets. I'm going to go out and sell tickets. And then he can get on it. Or sometimes if you're new in a town, you might have to just get tickets and be like, I will fight for tickets. You give me whatever your value is as a fighter. You give me 100 tickets. That's my pay. If I sell them, I sell them. If I don't, I don't. I need to prove that I'm value to you. But if I sell all those tickets and need more, then I'm a value now. So that would be something to look at for some of those guys when they are moving to towns and they need to prove themselves that they can't get into a fight promotion.
Yeah, it takes a lot. I mean, that's a lot between the fitness, the learning. But by the way, you need to know how to fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also add to that the complexity of age. What is the average age of an MMA fighter?
That, as far as that, I don't know. I mean, I've seen them from guys are starting at 18 and fighting all the way up into their 40s now. Yeah. So. I think what they say is
the median 26, maybe 25.
Yeah, I think they say athletic potential. Your athletic and skill potential, as far as your mindset and everything else, used to be for sports. I believe they said it was 26 to 28 was kind of that magic zone where you're at your athletic peak and your mental peak of everything. And after that, your athletic peak, just because of age, might go down, but you still get smarter and you still learn more and more technique. But I think that's changed a little bit. So a lot of the UFC title holders are, 30 to 35 now.
Yeah.
That I've seen. I think just because for MMA you do have to learn so much.
But when you're paying your dues,
yeah,
you're 18, 19, 20.
Oh yeah.
And the distractions that happen when you're 18, 19, 20, like your buddies want to go out and party and you want to go out and meet girls or boys in the case of girls, and on top of that you have to manage figure out how you're going to pay for all this and learn how to fight and do all these other promotional activities.
Yeah, and you have to find a job that's going to allow you to leave when you have a fight, have shorter hours during fight camp, that you can also pay your bills. Yeah, there's a lot to it. It's definitely a struggle. So
it's kind of a miracle that this happens.
Yes, and some of the athletes are able to get. I've heard stories of athletes getting different types of sponsorships.
Yeah.
I know of a local athlete that was able to get a sponsorship from a company where they were giving him a stipend each month because they thought he had a lot of potential, and he did have a lot of potential. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to give you $1,200 a month as a stipend, but your first fight that you make over $50,000, you start paying us back whatever we gave you to get into it. So they put that investment into him. I believe there was a company called Team Takedown that did something similar with Johnny Hendricks, where they were giving him money to live on. They gave him a house. They gave him a training camp and all this, but then they took half of his purse once he started making over $1 million. So for them it was an investment, but at the beginning they're like, all right, Johnny, you're a super high caliber wrestler. We're going to give you $100,000 a year and a house to live in.
State, right? Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that worked out for him from the beginning, and then once he started making enough money, he's like, oh well, I want to make all my money now, and then they parted ways. So that's an option that young fighters could look at, but that's tough to find that. What do they call them? It's not angel sponsors. Is that what they're called? Like when somebody does that?
That. There's such a thing as an angel investor. I don't know if an angel sponsor might be something. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe it's considered the same thing, where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to angel invest in this athlete and give him enough money to live on so that he can try to fulfill his dream.
Hopefully, the more exposure the sport gets, the more you see of that.
Yeah, and I think there's some other things that are happening. I've talked to some people that I guess there's some schools now where you can, as a high school student, go to this school, and it's a private school where you do your homework and then you train MMA, and then that's the daily routine.
Wow.
And I'll try to find out, and maybe we can keep in touch. I'll try to find out what that school was called, because that would be an interesting.
That'd be a great show.
Yeah, that would be a great show, because I'd be like, how is he doing this?
Yeah.
And how are how many kids are going, and how many are really trying to make a living doing MMA? Because there's no programs in schools for even jiu-jitsu or no-gi grappling yet, which hopefully there will be at some point, because that's the next thing that would take it off. To get MMA and everything bigger would be, getting no-gi grappling or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu into the Olympics, and then having that sport as a sport, in the high schools, in the middle schools, so all the wrestlers could cross over. Because a lot of the high school wrestlers, they don't have a professional sport to go to, like a basketball player or a football player that's at that elite level. Like, their thing is going to be either the Olympics, but even after that, where do they go? They go to MMA, and a lot of those wrestlers do now. So if you had, in the high schools, just some submission grappling to help those guys cross over, that would be great.
Okay.
And then that's something I'd always recommend to anybody that is wrestling in high school that's thinking about that. go do 1 or 2 striking classes a week somewhere, whether it's boxing or kickboxing, just so you know the basics. So when you're done wrestling, because you're going to spend a lot of time wrestling through high school and college, that you're not brand new, that you know a little bit. That'll help you out if that's your goal.
Cool. So what's your goal as you continue to develop this promotion? Do you see yourself as somebody who could be sort of like, for lack of a better word, like a regional minor league, so that people then can move up to the national level promotions? How do you see this?
So it just depends upon where the state goes with people and athletes. I see that right now in Montana, the better athletes end up moving out of state, so they can go to bigger schools where there are the fighters that are already in the UFC and there's those Olympic caliber athletes. We have a lot of great coaches in Montana, but we're still limited on people. It's a smaller area. So if you move, to, Winklejohn's Academy, then you're going to have UFC fighters that are already in the UFC to train with, right? And that's going to step up your game. It's just that iron sharpens iron kind of thing. And,
right.
All the information's out there. There's good techniques out there that everybody can study, everybody can find, but you need those high caliber athletes. So a lot of those people are kind of moving as they get to that point. As far as our show and the future of that, like, we're going to keep doing what we're doing, keep providing a space for new athletes and local fighters to compete, see if it's for them, showcase their skills, start getting some experience, and kind of keep it local. Right now it's very hard. There's local shows everywhere in every single state, and there's a ton. I think there's probably 4 promotions in Montana that do local events like we do. And everybody has different views and different ways they do things as far as like what they think the rounds should be and what they think the rules should be for amateurs.
So there's no unified rule set for that?
No, there is not. Not in Montana. So Montana, there is no commission. And lots of other states, most every other state has an athletic commission that sanctions professional and amateur mixed martial arts. So in Montana, there is no athletic commission that sanctions mixed martial arts. So you have promotions that will literally have hair pulling legal.
No.
Like that, yeah, yep. So, I mean, we saw a video of a fight a couple years ago. Super low level show. A girl's holding a girl down by her hair on the mat. Yeah, and it's terrible.
But that doesn't help, right?
It doesn't help. And
that's frustrating.
Yeah, we had a guy that was a friend of ours that went to fight in a show in California that was on a local reservation there that wasn't sanctioned. And it's a professional show. And I'm like, I call the people up, and the guy's like, oh, I know the guys. I want to fight there. And I'm like, he's my friend, so I'm like, let me call them and just see what's going on. I mean, they did no blood work. There's no fight contracts before these pros go down there. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing, man? Like, you can't be doing that. And, if people can get away with something, they'll try it.
So what are the basics of running a professional promotion, like something that is tight? So
one of the big things for us, obviously, fighter safety is number one. Right,
okay.
So that's always initial. So proper matchmaking is important for that, which can be difficult with the amateurs because you don't really know everybody levels. You got like, oh, this guy's coach says this guy coach says that. Making sure the guys are weighing in properly. I hear stories all the time like, oh, my guy didn't weigh in, or my guy missed weight, or people looking at a scale when someone's weighing in and lying about what it says so that the promoter doesn't lose their fight. Like, my ethics are always 100%, but I hear these stories from other things and other shows, so you have to be careful. So the other thing with any promotion across the board outside of the UFC and the bigger shows is like anybody can be on PEDs. Nobody's testing except the bigger shows. It's just too expensive, so like anybody could be on anything. They're not going to run a lab on that. So that can be dangerous, and that's something that we can't even control. If we hear that somebody might be doing something, then we try not to book them anymore. But fighter safety is number one. And so we're always looking at what our rule sets are for our amateurs. So we follow the standard UFC rules. If you're familiar with those, I'm not going to go through all of them. It's a long list. But we have no elbows to the head, no knees to the head for our amateurs, no twisting leg locks or knee locks, because if you're new and somebody puts you in a foot lock, you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't have any of that. There's certain...
I've been training for 6 years. I barely know what's going on with a lot of the crazy heel hooks. And
there's so much new stuff, and you can't put in, and I've seen this happen. Like, oh, here's a regional black belt world champion, and somebody else that's 0-1 in MMA, but this person's willing to fight this person because they're not educated. And if that black belt goes in and you let them do whatever they want, they're going to hurt this person, potentially. And so I've seen that happen as well.
Yeah.
So,
And no soccer kicks probably is another one?
Yeah, that's one of the standard UFC rules. So all the standard UFC rules with a few exceptions. We don't – a professional athlete, let's say if you're in an arm bar and somebody picks you up to slam you down, it's up to you to protect your head and let go. But for the amateurs, we don't let them pick somebody up and slam them on their head. Their shoulder or back has to hit first. Or if I'm in a triangle, you've seen that where guys like – I think Rampage Jackson used to do it, pick guys up and just slam them down on the ground. And they hit their head first, and then that would knock them out. But we don't allow that for the amateurs because they might not know that, I need to let go. This is a learning process. We don't want, especially with our amateurs, we don't want them hurt. We want them to be able to learn, and we don't want them to get cut. We don't want any injuries that's going to...
I guess, but you have to know it's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to... the pros do. The pros, if you get picked up, that's up to you to let go. If you're a professional, you should know enough jiu-jitsu and grappling that if you're in trouble, you need to bail out of that position or change what you're doing. So those are the few of the things we do with the amateurs is really... the rule set, and then making sure we have good referees, and we're always working on training our referees and keeping them up to date on the latest rules and ABC commission stuff. So even though we're not sanctioned, we follow all the ABC rules. The biggest thing that we do different with amateur fights is the rounds. So some promotions like 3-minute rounds and some like 4-minute rounds, and a lot of the sanctioned amateur events throughout the states are 3-minute rounds. My thought is I like 4-minute rounds. If we're trying to get these amateurs ready to be pros and they're going from 3-minute rounds to 3 5-minute rounds, that's too big a leap. That's a big leap.
Yeah, 5 minutes is a long time. That's a lot of fighting for anybody who doesn't know. 5 minutes feels like a year.
Yeah, exactly. And if you've only been doing threes and you're almost doubling the time when they step over to pro, I don't like that. So we do 4 minutes because I think that helps them prepare more for the pro fights. And it also helps the grapplers out. Because it could take you 2 minutes to get somebody down to the ground, and then you have a minute to work. That's not fair either. So I do like the 4-minute rounds better on that as far as like the promotion for the fights and getting those amateurs ready for the pro leagues. And it also makes sure they work their cardio. I think part of the reason they have 3-minute rounds for some shows is like the promoter's like, I just want exciting fights. I think these guys are going to get tired, and if I do 3-minute rounds, then they're going to look fresher.
Yeah. So I mean, you're very passionate about this. You're doing this. Why are you doing this in Montana? Are you from here?
I'm originally from Casper, Wyoming. I went to film school here and then ended up staying here. Had met my wife here, so we ended up just staying. I didn't really want to move to a big city. And then I'd been training that whole time I was in school, and then we started in a garage as far as like training partners and friends. And then now we have a nice 3-room facility with lots of training area and a lot of good coaches and a lot of great people here. So that's how we kind of ended up in Montana.
And what's it like to do business here in Bozeman in Montana?
It's great. Bozeman's really growing, which has been interesting because it was smaller. And then now that everyone's saying, it's one of the top places to move to, it's like now it's been exploding. So we've gone from even like within the last year, I think we had 100 gym members last year, and like today we're sitting at like 165.
Wow!
Like within a year time, that's a lot. But it's great to do business here. The weather's nice most of the time. So
as we had like sideways flurries.
This isn't too bad, but the weather's good. The people are really nice. It still has that small town feel, and we'll see how that changes over the next couple of years with how much it's growing. Okay. But I do like doing business with everybody in Montana and the different locations and venues and teams. So you do get to meet a lot of the different other teams and coaches, and everybody gets to train with each other throughout the state because it is a little bit smaller community for that.
That's great. What would you say? So how long have you been doing Fightforce?
So we did our first Fightforce fight in 2006.
Wow.
And then I helped with a few other promotions before that where I just kind of assisted with what they were doing. And it was kind of just, again, for me to go in and learn and help these guys out. But I think the first one in Montana, the first MMA show was in 2001. And then, but we'd gone to some shows in Canada and Idaho and some other places before that where I kind of was like just observing and seeing like mainly how my fighters were being treated. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I would not let that happen on my events. So
makes sense. So what has been the number one lesson that you've learned for anybody considering starting something, a small business or anything, a new venture? What's been the number one lesson you've learned doing this?
I do think you want to find something that you love and that you're interested in. So if you're just doing something to make money, and it's not working for you, you're not going to be happy. Like I can still do this and be happy with it. And I'm at the point now that, I do make money off of the things that I love to do. So I'm very blessed that way. So it keeps me motivated and keeps me going because like, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm happy about. This is what I'm passionate about. And I like to use it to help people and benefit others. So I think that really helps as well.
Okay. So, and let's touch upon really quickly. So you have the academy here, and the name of the academy is
This is Montana Mixed Martial Arts.
Montana Mixed Martial Arts.
Yep.
And then you're saying you have you do hot sauce for wings. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that briefly. So we've won some awards at the biggest wing festival on the West Coast the last 4 years, which is called the Biggest Little City Wing Fest. And I've been making my own wing sauce since I was in college. There was a place when I was back home that had bought the original buffalo recipe from Buffalo, New York, and we'd eat wings all the time. When I moved to Bozeman, there wasn't very good wing sauce anywhere. So I'd spend my weekends literally in college, like we'd be training, then I'd go home and just tinker with hot sauce and making wing sauces and hot sauces. So I came up with our original recipe, which started winning some awards, and then I've come up with 8 or 9 other recipes right now that we sell, and we sell to local restaurants and business.
If our audience is interested in wing sauce, where do you find this wing sauce?
So it is wingredient.com. So just the word ingredient or the W on the front, but it's wingredient.com. And we're trying to get it out there, and we've just been doing that for this year. So it's a fun, another side passion project that get out and doing. So.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, you're a member of the community, and you're finding different ways to do what you love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't get any much better than that.
Exactly.
And what are your websites for both your academy here as well as the promotion?
So the promotion is fightforce.com, and the academy is montanamma.com. And we got Facebook pages for everything as well.
And Instagram, I presume, or some.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Bryan, for taking the time to sit down with me today. It's been great
to
learn about
Absolutely.
everything you're doing. And
thank you.
Congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Small Business War Stories. If you enjoy the show, share it with a friend, or you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our blog at blog.proven.com. If you have an idea for us, we'd love to hear it. Please email us at podcast@proven.com. See you next time. Small Business War Stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes.